Hello, my name is Andy Smith, and I want to welcome you to the second session about working memory in words. And we're going to be looking at narration this time. This session will build on the previous one, so make sure that you have listened to part one before tackling this one. The world of working memory in words. And our goal is to understand Lee and Leah, those with limited working memory capacity, in whatever age they are. And we're going to review a little bit about self-control and working memory. And then we're going to head over to thinking about working memory in terms of cognitive processing of information and look at narration through that lens. And we go back to this neurological character lens. If we ever hope to understand Lee and Leah, we have to understand, is it that they can't or that they won't? Huge difference. So we'll just do a little short review, working memory capacity as a core cognitive trait. We're going to tease out a little more of working memory and self-control. And then I'm going to introduce verbal working memory, and we're going to look at some strategies to help support. Going back to this cognitive trait, attention control. It's a cornerstone of higher order cognition. Working memory is a base, and then there's lots of things, comprehension, language processing, problem solving that are on top of that. And so we want to think attentional control, cognitive control, executive control, all that is probably new to the Mason community as a human trait. And so this is something I like to show folks. This is a heritability estimate for various things you see. Heritability index, what it says is you take 100 people, you put them in a room, and we'll take the top one, human height. 90 to 91% of the variation in height is going to be due to genetic impact. So that helps us to sort of understand, not much environmental impact, something that just goes along with who that person is. Autism and ADHD are right up there. And look at working memory capacity. And this was taken from a meta-analysis 2018 study. 0.7 to 0.9, that's huge. So how much is a Mason education, or any education for that matter, how much is it going to impact working memory capacity? We say, some, but not a whole lot. And if you look down, you can see there's personality traits, what they call the big five, and some other things. If I look down at psychological interest, so you think, these years of nature journaling and living books and so forth, this can have a huge impact in terms of psychological interest. But when we think of working memory capacity, much, much higher heritability. So expectations. What are my expectations of a child with working memory issues? And if you have an ADHD kid, high chance the parents are too. So then you think, okay, what are my expectations for myself as an adult, or what are my expectations from a Mason education? These are all things we have to be checking and sorting. Okay, so a little review. We saw how self-control bridges this gap between an event, our response, and an outcome, our imagined future, and how we use our nonverbal, it's our visual spatial working memory system. It's a GPS, it's a map that's going to take us to our future. And different folks are going to have different capacities along that way. Some folks are going to see just right in front of them. Some other folks are going to, when they look out, the future, they just see it. And then some folks, and you've known these folks way into the future, way into the future. I think about Deanie Van Pelt starting to do the Charlotte Mason centennial. It was a couple of years ago. She started talking to Carol, and I thought, whoa, your outcomes, you have a very long view, don't you? Okay, and so here's just, we think about managing yourself relative to time. That's been around for a long time. There's old Aesop's fable, right? And so here's the little ants. They're taking their action now. They're getting ready for their imagined future. And here's the poor old grasshopper. He's just involved in the immediate gratification. He's fiddling his days away. And so I thought, here's Dr. Seuss. This is where I think of working memory capacity. Some people can just juggle or manage just one little thing. And people have varying capacities to juggle or to manage. So we looked at how much does the now, the immediate, where I am, the external impact us. And if we're looking at self-control, which we had, that's really important. But also, you can think of this in terms of gifting. There are some people, they're wired to be, they're very good in the immediate. So I'll give you an example. There was a caterer, did all these big events. And she was telling me her daughter drove her nuts, 20-something. She said she was a wreck. She said, but when she came to help me at my catering events, she was magnificent. Everybody loved her. She could do things right there on the spot in the immediate, but don't ask her to plan. Don't ask her to get ready for things. And so if you think of even like careers, you have carpenters, videographers, graphic designers, all those people, they are dealing with the now. So that's part of their gifting. Really smart folks that want to go into medicine, the docs with ADD, what specialties appeal to them? ER, emergency room, and surgery. So it's part of who we are, as well as being a challenge for us. So being wired now to react in the immediate can have self-regulation difficulties. And we saw last time how the nonverbal working memory impacts our sense of time and managing ourselves relative to time. But we didn't cover the verbal working memory. And since both of these are going to impact our capacity to problem solve, and that's plan and think creatively, reflexively, we're going to take a little peek now into the verbal working memory. The difficulty with problem solving, I think some people just like it, they like their components listed right out. That means you're going to have problems with decision-making, planning, self-monitoring, self-questioning, sustaining attention or sustaining effort, so forth. And we go back to what's the core principle. The core principle is you design the now, the immediate, to support the self-control, self-regulation. So you think of what are the external modifications, the environmental modifications I can make. How am I going to use the now? And Barclay says designing the external is actually like a prosthetic device for those that have impaired self-regulation. The same way that a person with mobility challenges that's in a wheelchair has to use a ramp. So the ADD person has to use these environmental supports for self-control and self-direction. Go back to the core principle. Make the invisible, the information that you'd hold in working memory, make it visible. So you can ask, or I will ask you, where can you, as an adult, or Leah, depending on her age, where can you use lists? Where can you use charts, to show all the different steps of a routine so that you can make sure you're getting each of those and reminding what needs to be done. Where can you put, or where can Lee put up Post-it notes, which visual prompts for remembering. So can Lee, if he's in school, put a note on his locker, Post-it note on his locker, inside his locker door? If I want to learn, make sure I'm keeping up with my what the dentist wants me to do with flossing my teeth, I don't put the note in my calendar book, floss your teeth, but I put it right there, up in the mirror, in my visual field to help me remember. And, you can use your cell phone. You can use your cell phone to be an external working memory. And I used to get mixed up. I couldn't find my car when I came back out of the parking lot. I used to put a milk jug on it. My teenage son was horrified. Now I just take a picture of the work on my phone. There you go. If I'm packing to go to London, take a picture of what the different outfits need to be. If you have a kid, what does a picked up bookcase or shelf look like? Take a picture, post it. So you're externalizing, you're making remembering visible. And you need to think, what planner does Leah use every day? Planning, time management, the biggest challenge for those with ADHD. So this is one system. You put tasks, you assign in different piles, and then you put that to your planner. This is just sort of an idea. There's another idea. You can find this on the internet, the Eisenhower matrix. It's what's important, not important, urgent, not urgent. And there's some wonderful stuff out there. Now, when we get to the verbal working memory, I want to go back to Barclay because he does such a magnificent job of these frontal lobe functions, what we call executive function, but he applies them to the whole thing of self-regulation. The verbal working memory, it's the mind's voice. It starts to become internalized somewhere between 3 and 5 years old up to 8 years old. And that's where you talk to yourself. You talk to yourself, remember to do this, remember, don't hit Billy, don't hit Billy. You're using language to guide your behavior. And so when you have a strong verbal working memory, you can interrogate yourself. You can ask yourself questions. So Carol comes in and he grumps at me. And instead of just responding reactively with some kind of snarky remark, I think, I asked myself, well, I wonder if he had a bad day. He was going to visit his friend in the hospital. Was this the day he did that? Maybe he's down about that. Or maybe did he not get some sleep? So you can use your mind's voice to get more information out of a situation than just the visual, spatial imagery, your nonverbal working memory. So what's going to happen with Lee and Leah now? When their voice is weak, you're going to see it's not strong enough for self-control. They're caught up in the now. They're caught up in the immediate. What happens is they can be more vulnerable to people that their self-determination is very strong. They know what they're doing. And they can just kind of piggyback on them. Now, I want you to follow down the bottom. They don't comprehend what they are exposed to as easily as others, whether it's what they read, what they see, or what they hear. And we'll come back to that. So when the mind's voice is weak, Lee and Leah, and Andy Smith is right in that pile, right there, we need to talk in order to think. And otherwise, it's like you glimpse your thoughts. So it's the dryer that's in the laundromat, and the clothes are like thoughts that are spinning around, and you go, oh, there's something with maybe black and white stripes, or there's something red, but you can't, it's like you can't get to the thoughts and be able to take them out and go, oh, this is a red shirt. Oh, these are a blue pair of pants. They all just, they spin. And so people with weak, their mind's voice is weak. They can tend to talk more because they can't get to their thoughts alone. Not to talk almost is like not to think. And they will need to be able to talk to people, to externalize their problem solving so that they can move forward. The people, the Lees and Leahs of this world are going to need others. And you think others are people in the environment, right? That's that external, that are going to listen sympathetically, that are going to be empathetic, non-judgmental. I think about Mason in terms of the role of the teacher in listening to narrations. And I thought that's exactly what the teacher does in that sense. But also to ask Leah, is this what you want to be doing? What is it? Where are you wanting to go with this? What's this about? I'm not going to lecture, not going to try to fix everything, but just notice the progress. And those of us with weak working memories, we really respond to, we need the encouragement, the praise of this. It's not being a people pleaser, but it's externalizing motivation. So we need cheerleaders around us. This is something that Mary Salanto uses in her book, and I think it's marvelous. She calls them mantras, and they're things that you repeat to yourself over and over and over and over again to help you correct or help to remind you of your self-regulation needs and what you need to be doing for self-control. So here you go. If it's not in my planner, it doesn't exist. You say this every day. If it's not in my planner, it doesn't exist. That means I'm working, whether it's leisure time or a specific task, I'm working on something that's goal related. I'm not just reacting. If you have trouble getting started, then the first step is too big. If you're getting stuck, then the first step is too big. So even if you just do something for a minute, break it down. You break it down, even if it's just for a minute. And so you can read some more of those. Having those mantras, you come in, you're tired, you want to just throw things down. Andy, don't put it down, put it away. Don't put it down, put it away. Those kind of maxims or mantras help with the weak mind's voice. So here's a strategy, and this is let's do a noticing. And there's dear Jack Laws. He does, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, for all the nature journaling. And you can do, let's do a noticing on anything, with anything. So typically now, if you're doing picture study, a teacher in a Mason school will give something about the context of the painter, and then give children several minutes to look at the picture, take it in, and then they turn the picture down, then they narrate it back. So think about this. We're going to adapt this and make it an externalized observation. So let's do a noticing is more like this. It's the stream of consciousness. You're sharing whatever thoughts that you're noticing. And if it's a group of 4-year-olds that are gathered around an amaryllis, if it's a group of 10-year-olds that are out on a nature walk, looking at a tree, if it's a family looking at a building that they're passing, you go, oh, guys, let's do a noticing. And so as different people share, then what that does is that causes the other people to, I noticed that. So you're deepening the observing by doing this. It's nice, it's low tech, you can do it anywhere. And remember, you think, for those of us with weak working memory, it's like if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, right? And I want to tell you this example. I know Mason wanted her students, by the time they finished school, 250 pictures in their heads of what they had, of picture studies, pictures they had done. And when I started learning, really coming to grips with working memory, it was several years ago. I was in Rome with my husband and my son. Knew we were going to go to the Sistine Chapel. I had read about the Sistine Chapel. I had read about Michelangelo. Interesting old soul. He was kind of quirky. And so I had the background knowledge. I had a friend tell me about how you go through this little narrow door and you open it up and there you are in the chapel. So everything that we can think of in terms of background knowledge, in terms of interest, excitement. And so I went, and I don't know if you can, I think you can see it. On either side, there are these little cement benches around the periphery, whole interiors filled with people. And I found a little space. I sent my husband and my son on, and I stayed for hours. I'll probably never get back here. And I was looking, that is Ezekiel. And I was looking at them and I thought, okay, let's see what. And so I was describing, I was whispering to myself what Ezekiel looked like, and the beautiful coral colors and so forth. And then I closed my eyes and I couldn't see it. I opened my eyes and I did that maybe an hour or two. And I whispered out loud. I narrated my experience. I did everything that I knew, and I would close my eyes and the image was gone. And so those are neural circuits that are not activating. Now, I remember the experience. Remember all all of his figures looks like they've been at the gym and have all these sculpted muscles. But to this day, if I close my eyes, it's not there. It's fuzzy. So let's look at a little bit at working memory and development now. We know that there are individual differences in working memory due to just heredity. And now we're going to look at differences in working memory that change with development, with frontal lobe development. Barclay's really good about this, and he talks about self-control. And so as the frontal lobes mature, there are these developmental transitions in what is controlling behavior. We've talked about a few of those already, but there's this gradual shift. I love this. I put this in just for you guys to have it. He talks about time horizons, and we have to, as adults, we have to adjust our expectations to the developmental time horizons of the child. So if I'm a parent of a teenager and I'm fussing and upset that they're not getting ready for this project that is due at the end of the month, I think, oh, well, is that realistic? Look, teenagers, their time horizons are only like, 1 to 5 days. Now, we're going to get into, remember, working memory, it's not passive storage. It is active cognitive processes with the maturation of the prefrontal cortex. And I'm going to give you just a second to kind of look at this. I thought this will show inhibition is, you think of as overriding an impulse. So when researchers administered the test, because they're looking to see, okay, what kind of working memory improvement is there? This is what they do. These are the kind of tests that have been done. And they know the period of 3 to 7 years old is a time of marked improvement, especially the 3 to 5 year olds, on many of these cognitive tasks that require you to hold something in mind, plus you have to inhibit a response. You have to say night when you're shown a picture of the sun. Children of 3.5 to 4.5 find this task very difficult. By the age of 6 or 7, it is trivially easy. Not interesting. Here's another one. These are called neuropsychological tests that they give. 4.5 to 8 years old, there's this continued and marked improvement. And then after about 8, there's just just sort of a little gradual improvement. So you can see how prefrontal cortex development is going to help with these cognitive control capacities. And if you want to think about, let's don't go to all these psychological neuropsych tests because now they're kind of sterile and they're kind of in the lab. But let's just look at what working memory looks like in everyday situations. And I've taken from the Guar and Dawson series and a few other authors, Barclay, and just pulled some of the things they've said. You can go back and look at them. There you have them. And that's typical development. And then you can look at your kid and go, oh, well, they're not, yeah, that's a little hard for them. So you can see, around ages 8 and 10, You do household chores that are 15 to 30 minutes. Then you get in middle school, you do chores that are 60 to 90 minutes. If you want to have a nice, concise thing of working memory in children, I would recommend you go to this article. She does a fantastic job, makes everything succinct, right to the point, and will give you some of the functional signs of limited working memory. So if you look at development, I think, okay, as the years increase, the quantity of information that you hold in mind increases. The difficulty of the task is going to increase. The time spans are going to increase. Your schedule, you just get more packed into it. Busier schedule increases, more activities. But there should be then a decreasing of adult support. Basically, you don't need the adult frontal lobe prefrontal cortex because the child's prefrontal cortex is developing. If you want to see how working memory is assessed in an adult, here you go. And I took these from an inventory of executive functions. Now it said on the front, please don't share this with unqualified people. So I couldn't just give you a photocopy of it. But this is the things that you have to check. I have a short attention span. I have trouble with jobs or tasks that have more than one step, so forth. These should be familiar to you. And if you look at the functional signs of executive functioning deficits, you could come back to this another time. You can see how much working memory from what we've learned, even so far, how much is going to impact those. Sorry, this is out of order. In the 2 slides ago, when there was the adult assessment, all right, this is the directions, this is the instructions that are given to the clinician regarding the working memory section. And you can see, again, it's much of what we've discussed already. Now, here's something that is, to me, that was stunning when I first read it. This is how Dr. Brown, who's a well-known ADHD expert, how he assesses working memory. There are 2 stories, each about 1 paragraph long, about 25 word units. You ask the patient, I'm going to read you 2 short stories. Each is just a paragraph. Listen carefully. After I read the first story, I'll stop and ask you to retell the story back to me with as close to the same words as possible without making changes. I don't expect you to remember every word of the story, too many words for that, but I'm asking you to pretend like you're a tape recorder and say it back to me as close to the same words as you can. Now, this is much more of a parroting, a tape recording. There's not the child's self-agency involved, but how much does that sound like narration? And then after each story, I stop and ask the patient to repeat. No prompts other than anything else, even if it's out of order, doesn't matter. So when we think about narration, we think, oh, giving back a story is a working memory task. So now we're going to kind of think about working memory in terms of the cognitive processing of information. I have to remind you from last time too, if it deals with time, it involves working memory because there's an order. There's something that happened and continues. So if it deals with time, it deals with working memory. So this is just a short mention of how working memory relates to new learning when it comes to what we think of the school task, school kind of learning. We're not talking about the learning to play tennis, but more of dealing with facts and ideas and experiences. So there's a long-term memory system. Think of old learning, and things get stored in there. They get, years and years. The short-term memory is the new sensory information that's coming in, or perceptual information. They come together. The working memory is like a mixing bowl that creates the new learning. Yeah, one of the things Mason does, well, she talks about reviewing a lesson, and that's pulling in prior knowledge, that's activating that long-term memory. And so you think we have to, part of a lesson, part of knowing is activating that prior knowledge and putting the new perceptual information on top of that. Now, what happens to learning for the Leahs of the world when the working memory capacity is not very large, very strong? Think of how much lost learning happens, how much very shallow processing. So when we think of narration, we're wanting to adapt it to the working memory capacity that Leah and Lee can deal with. So for these guys, you have to go for quality over quantity. You have to reduce the amount of text that they have to process. You have to shorten the piece, whatever it is, so that they can process it within their working memory. Now, you're also going to have to allow more time because they are going to have to externalize, and I'll show you that with the squiggle notes. Often we use read alouds that has a higher vocabulary level because we're introducing new vocabulary that the kids are going to deal with. But it might be too much to hold in working memory for Lee or Leah. So we might even have to reduce the reading level. And so when we think of narration, I think of it as an input side and an output. There's receptive, there's expressive. And when we think about narration, that language that a child uses, using their own agency, they're retelling an experience or they're retelling a living book. It's not the same as parroting. It's not the same as tape recording, right? But narration doesn't exist alone. Narration always exists within the context of the narrative, the living book, the literary form, and and in the pursuit of relations. And so whatever adaptations we make for limited working memory, it has to have this understanding that the student is a generative being. It's never top down. We're not going back to any of these old methods. It has to involve the student's agency. There is the use of language for deeper knowing. It's all about relationships. It has to have the narrative. And so you keep this understanding that knowing is an inside out. It is not an outside in. It is not a teacher giving you comprehension questions. It is not, it involves that inside out. So I want to tell you something. It's called squiggle notes. And it's taking the strategy, making remembering visible. So a squiggle note is just a quick reminder of an idea, of a scene, of something that the student pictured. It's not a full-blown, drawn narration. It's quick. And it makes sense to the person, but doesn't make sense to others. It's going to capture the student's mental picture of something at that time. They want to put it down. It's an external remembering. Then they can move on so that there's space. Their cognitive space can be used for further processing. It also makes learning manual. So you think how much listening can be just, you're dealing with mental info. Now, when you have to make a squiggle note, you've included a greater degree of physicality. So I did this one time. I don't think you can really see this, but you see the squiggle notes. You keep it on a small piece of paper because you don't want the student all over the place. And they just take note of whatever it is that they're thinking at the moment, and it makes sense to them. I went back and I tried to, I did this a couple of years ago. I thought, we'll use this. I couldn't make sense of all those squiggles because they made sense to me at the time when I was demonstrating it, but I hadn't turned it into language. So I took the George Washington Carver story and I turned it into squiggle notes. And you can see up at the top right, it's telling about George Washington Carver. He was born. It was basically inconsequential. I was reading it out loud and I just drew, that's supposed to be a pregnant woman's tummy. And then there's a big X, meaning it's no big deal. His birth was no big deal. Then it was talking about the peanut and how the peanut was despised. And that was a peanut with the little tongue under. It's like, bleh. And then the peanut, what happened with all the marvelous discoveries that George Washington Carver makes? So you can see the squiggle notes don't make sense to anybody else, but they make sense to the person right then. And then that's the externalizing, that's your externalizing step. And then you have this, and then to go back, you can tell the story. I can go back and tell the story about George Washington Carver, and just based on my little squiggles there. The child was very skinny and very sickly, and he coughed and a lot. So my squiggle on the top one was, the line just meant skinny, and those three, what do you call those, swishes, that was just him coughing. So it makes sense to the person right there at the time. And then you have the student go back and they have these, and then they can turn it into any kind of narration, but it has been a placeholder. And so it's all to me about expectations. Expectations for the child, and then also expectations in terms of dealing with the text. At what age we know the child takes the ideas that capture him or her, but then you start thinking about, okay, what kind of processing of this text is needed? And that becomes, we'll discuss more of that. Now, I want to just show you, I want to help you understand Lee and Leah and their processing. So I'm going to just do a really quick go through here. In Mason's era, people saw what we call cognitive control, self-determination, self-compelling person. But they didn't know what it was. They were trying to figure out this whole thing of what is cognition, right? It wasn't until the cognitive revolution, which is 1950s and on, that working memory came into understanding. So Mason, in her era, she was answering, memorizing is not real learning. And so she was taking her understanding of attention and applying it to that. Learning is not this sequential unfolding of faculties. And so she was using the science that she had to answer the questions of her time, but we have to be careful about importing those understandings of the habit of attention now. Okay, I just want to mention this to you. I had to cut some slides. What I want to mention to you is working memory. It's not just the mixing bowl, but when working memory pulls information from the long-term memory, whether it's knowledge about the world, like, Richmond is the capital of Virginia, whether it's knowledge from your own experiences, that visual spatial imagery system that we talked about last session, that there is even a selecting process. There is even an attentional control process going on. So working memory is going to selectively retrieve representations from long-term memory. Working memory is going to filter out some perceptual info, even in what you think of as the mixing process. Working memory, that attentional control is going to remove no longer relevant info. All right, here's high capacity Hal. Efficiently, his neural mechanisms in terms of what's coming in, working well. All right, look what happens to Leah. There's all this irrelevance coming in from working memory. From long-term memory. There's too much stuff coming in from the current sensory. And then there's just a whole lot of mental noise. And Mason described Leah. Lee, here you go. She's saying, you want to engage him about glass. She's trying to have a discussion about glass. Well, he wanders off to Cinderella's slipper, and he tells you about his godmother, and that gave him a boat, and then the ship that Uncle Harry came, went to America, and so forth. What she is describing is what we think of as tangential thinking. It's what happens when weak executive attention is not filtering, is not taking away task irrelevant thoughts. So that's what Mason saw. And she just used the science of her time, which we know wasn't accurate, but that's what she was seeing. And so when I think of our goal of understanding Lee and Leah, all right, there are some with the working memory capacity that I explained, things are just, they swirl around. And the high capacity Hal's, it's like a thought comes in, and that's a little machine, it's a little plastic thing. And you used to put quarters and nickels and dimes and what in it, and then it ching, 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 and then it just falls into its right categories. So that's the way some people's high capacity Hal have those kind of minds, where everything just falls into place. And so I just go back to this. We want to understand the Lees and Leahs of our lives. We want to adjust our expectations to fit who they are, what they have been given or not been given to steward. We have to understand their challenges with self-control, also with processing. We have to make learning more visible, more manual, more physical as much as we can. And we have to help these Leahs and Leahs, Lees and Leahs in our lives to really just find contentment and acceptance in who they are. So we'll pick up next time on reading comprehension, and we'll look at working memory in terms of motivation. We'll look at some strategies, and we'll wrap it up with a little bit of look at ADHD. Thank you for your attention, and I hope this has served as a primer to get you started thinking about working memory capacity.